Hi, I'm Nina. I'm a radical feminist living in Japan, and today I've got some news that is quite relevant. I'm going to be covering a piece of legislation coming out of Saitama Prefecture. Saitama Prefecture is neighboring Tokyo. It has a pretty big population for that reason, and it is proposing a piece of LGBTQ acceptance legislation, essentially. It became a trending topic on Twitter just a few days ago because a city councilwoman spoke up against the legislation as it stands because it's extremely vague, and during all of February, it was open for public comment. So people were commenting on it. And basically, I'm going to start by covering the legislation itself. Then I'm going to cover the councilwoman's objection to it and people's sort of feedback to her speaking publicly. So let's get into it. Okay, so I originally recorded going through like every single graph on this, but it ended up taking like an hour and I kept stammering and having to correct myself like I just did, and I found it unbearable to listen to record, so I assumed it would also be unbearable for you guys. Basically, in this legislative piece here, they did a survey, they got feedback from LGBTQ people and compared it to the rest of the population to compare and see what sort of troubles or worries LGBTQ people had in their daily lives and what could be done to improve that. So they asked them things about their mental state, how they felt in school, like how they felt unsupported in the workplace, what kind of issues came up. So basically, if I had to summarize it, I might write this down somewhere or something, like translate the graphs maybe would be better than me trying to explain every single one. Essentially, LGBTQ people were more depressed, had lower self-esteem, had a harder time envisioning a positive future for themselves. They had troubles starting from the age where school uniforms are mandatory and girls are forced to wear school uniforms that are highly sexualized by adult men. They expressed discomfort with not being able to choose their uniform. Girls in Japan cannot choose to wear pants, even in winter, so very uncomfortable physically and societally. And things like not having any sort of information about the fact that people can be gay was another one, or like not having correct information. And in the workplace, it was things like, policies that prioritize heterosexual couples and don't have any sort of allowances for homosexual couples. Like, oh, you can put your heterosexual girlfriend on your insurance plan, but you can't do that for a same-sex partner. Of course, because there's no same-sex marriage, so it's not like you can do that with a spouse. Things like, if you are married in Japan, you will not really be considered for transfer. They won't transfer you to a branch that's far away and force you to work in some other area because they know you have a family. But if you're in a same-sex relationship, well, then typically they don't know that, and you're not going to be able to say like, hey, I don't want to move because my same-sex partner lives here. Or things like, emergency contact, like you're in the hospital and they contact your parents instead of your same-sex partner, or things like that. So nothing too surprising. And then there were also things like, oh, I'm uncomfortable using the bathroom, which I assume is for trans-identified people. Stuff like that. So that was the gist of the survey. So there was a lot of LGBTQ people saying that they had issues with these certain things. And so this legislation has been designed to handle those, and it would be broadly applicable to basically all the public sector, both like government facilities, educational programs. The government would provide sort of like training seminars and information for companies to help them sort of like revise policies and make things more friendly. What they said is considerate of sexual minorities. And then they asked companies like, have you considered adapting any of these things? Why? Or like, which of these policies would you consider adapting? Like things like allowing a same-sex partner on the insurance plan, or allowing them to choose a uniform. Some companies in Japan do have uniforms, for example. It's not that common, but of course, like in a service industry, for example, they probably do. And so they talked about those things as well. And a lot of companies were just like, we don't really know what people need. So the government's like, oh, we'll set up like counseling resources, and we'll strengthen training programs, and we'll make like sort of like the Stonewall in the UK had, where they had this like ally member rainbow coalition champion or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they'll train companies in diversity seminars or whatever and let them get accreditation of some sort. The part that people have been reacting pretty negatively to is, one that I found was kind of alarming, is that a lot of their initiative was about like providing correct information, enlightening people with correct information about. I'm like, okay, but what does that mean? So correct information about LGBTQ. So LGB is pretty straightforward. Like, yeah, sexuality, human orientation, sexual orientation exists, is innate, immutable, and, natural, unharmful. And we have to like accommodate that. Like, that's fine. And of course, providing that information in age appropriate ways in the educational system seems fine to me. But then it's like, okay, but what does that mean about TQ? Like, are you going to tell them the correct information that people can change their sex, or that, if you want to play with dolls and you're a boy, it means you need to get castrated? Like, what correct information are they going to be just, enlightening us with? And other things like, oh, we need to be considerate to LGBTQ people in bathrooms. Like, okay, well, LGBT people don't need any special considerations in those situations. We really just need to like not be harassed about our private lives, be able to like be open about having a same-sex partner and not have that hurt us at work, or, as children as well, not to be harassed. We basically just want to be left alone and to have the same protections for our relationships that other people do. But for the TQ plus, I don't know what that means. Like, okay, so are you going to force women to share bathrooms? So of course, women reading that are like, what does it mean? Oh, we need to revise bathroom situations to be more considerate of LGBTQ people. So women are reading that are like, what does that mean? So like, because this would apply to schools, workplaces, government facilities. Very well would apply to sports, which are taken relatively seriously in Japan, which I think is true for most countries. But especially for young people take sports pretty seriously. So yeah, that is the initiative and how it's sort of vaguely worded in terms of like being considerate of, enlightening with correct information about. They were asking for people's feedback, and a lot of women were rightfully upset about it. Now, the woman who became trending over this is a city councilwoman. She spoke quite openly about it on Twitter. She did a short video, I think like 3 minutes, just expressing her hesitation about this law and how she does not like how discussion has been shut down about it, and how she used to be very pro all of this stuff, but she's now starting to feel hesitant after seeing what it's doing in other places. Her name is Kaga Nanae, and she was very clear about this, and she was talking about all of the letters and feedback that she's gotten from women. The hashtag that I saw that was trending on Twitter was like hashtag a woman's fear, and like hashtag transgender and things like that. Like in Japan, they often use a man's body but a woman's heart to describe trans women. It's like, well, if they really, and I saw tweets like, well, if they really had a woman's heart, they would understand the terror that a woman feels when she's in a restroom and a man comes in. Like, the fact is they don't understand that because they aren't women. They don't understand what we go through. And she was just talking about like, a lot of women are upset that they're being treated as being bigoted when they raise these very, very realistic fears and concerns. And another woman said, when I said that I was afraid of a male-bodied person coming into the restroom, I was told that I should seek counseling for it. And it doesn't matter, another quote, and it doesn't matter how much I understand their suffering, it doesn't change the fact that women's fear is being taken very lightly. And there's a clear conflict between the rights of men who self-identify as women and women, and things like this. So the sort of debates we've been having here for a long time, this became very, very public for the first time. You haven't really seen much of this debate reach the mainstream before now. And so they're talking about like, well, when there's a clash of rights, like, what do we do? Especially like in Japan, as you know, Japan has a lot of natural disasters compared to some countries. There are earthquakes, there are tsunamis, there are heavy rains and flooding that are pretty common, landslides, mudslides, volcanic eruptions even. So when these things happen, there are often, typhoons. Usually there are people who evacuate to emergency evacuation centers, which are usually elementary schools or large gymnasiums and things like that, where they just, roll out a bunch of mats and people just kind of hunker down and wait. But in these situations, of course, like they're sex segregated for bathrooms and resources and, changing areas for safety. And a lot of men are saying, well, we want to be treated as women in these spaces. But of course, we know from refugee camps in other countries how that usually goes for women. There's a lot of sexual assaults in those cases. So women are saying that's very scary if I'm in this super vulnerable place where my, house may be destroyed and I have nothing but the clothes in my bag. And then I have to worry about being assaulted. Like, that's just not fair for women. So she's saying, we need to consider women when we're making these laws and these sort of registrations moving forward. And we can't have all these vague wordings like, oh, be considerate of, and, enlighten people about. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive towards her. On March 1st, which is when this article was written that I'm looking at, 4,200 retweets had been done to her tweet and over 9,000 likes. And there was a lot of tags that were trending like, I support Councilwoman Kaga Nanae. That was one of the trending hashtags. And people saying things like, she did a great job saying what all of us have been struggling to say. It took a lot of courage to say what she did. Protecting women's safety in spaces is not trans discrimination. It's bizarre that women protecting their own rights is considered discriminatory, etc. But yes, in the legislation, it does mention like reforming all of these things like bathrooms and emergency shelters and all of this stuff. So that is very scary for women who live in this area. I would be really interested to see, like I said, or actually, no, I'm re-recording this. I didn't say. So in order to comment on this legislation, it had to be a public comment, which means like your name, your address was recorded. And so a lot of women, especially, were really afraid of doing that because they've seen what happens in other countries. So here's a quote like, especially when it comes to the transgender problem, we have seen what happens to women or people who speak up in the foreign countries, and they've received death and rape threats. In Japan, similarly, people have been threatened and forced to apologize over similar comments. With this sort of background, it's really... a lot of people feel really uneasy trying to submit public comments about this, even if the government requests them. This councilwoman was saying, like, yeah, she could really sense that people were feeling very uneasy about it. And she said she herself was actually very afraid of speaking out, but she kept hearing from women, and she figured that this was the time to speak out. She had no other choice. If she waits until if these measures get put into place and then she tries to speak out, it's going to be too late. So she decided to speak out on social media. And her last request is just that please don't think about the rights of only one small group of people. Please consider the human rights and the safety of women and children. So they're going to be making the more specific sort of plans, like what's going to happen when. Apparently that will be happening in April. That's the plan, at least. So I'm going to be following this story and see where it goes. I really hope that these public comments, especially from women, are taken seriously. And most of all, we really need to get the LGB and the TQ blah, blah, blah separated, because as you can see, we have totally different needs. I want to salute this woman for just being just badass and awesome, for putting herself out there. And I hope that it doesn't escalate to the degree it has in other countries, and that, because they are starting to get a pretty strong foothold in the Japanese media as well, but it is not quite as far gone as other places. So I hope her name goes down in history as someone who really helped put the brakes on this. But yeah, that is what I was really eager to tell you guys about, this legislation. And if I manage to get that translated and put up somewhere, the articles and stuff, I'll put that out for you guys, but I just kind of summarized it quickly here. Anyway, I'll stop here for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, leave a comment, leave suggestions for what you'd like to see next, except for this story, because I will be following it and giving you guys updates whenever I can. But yeah, and if you want to be my wife, just leave an application in your comments, that's fine too. And yeah, keep it sloppy, everyone. Bye.